Hello, welcome to the answer key. So if you decided to do this optional extra practice, that's great. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just let you look at the answer key first, and I'm not going to explain any of the problems yet. So go ahead and check 1 through 4. And then after I've shown you the full answer key, I'm going to go over each of the problems. So what you can do is just check your answers to start, pause the video whenever you need, and then you can fast forward and rewind and jump around to any of the problems that you want to go over. So now that you've checked your answers to 5 and 6, let me give you some more answers. And again, just pause the video if anything's too fast. And stay tuned. If there's any problem you want to go over, you can just fast forward to the appropriate part of the video. Okay, and there's our final answers. All right, so taking a look. For number 1, we're looking for the equation of the line. So we're using slope-intercept form. That's y equals mx plus b. To find the slope, I did rise over run. So I chose this point and this point because they went through nice clear corners. You could choose this point instead. And then I noticed the rise was down 3. So this was down 3, which is going to be negative 3. And then 1 to the right, so I use positive 1. If I simplify that, I get negative 3. Now, since this is multiple choice, that's actually enough to solve the problem, because the only line here, oh, not quite. This one has a slope of negative 3 also. So you could right away cross out A and B, but now you still need to find the y-intercept in order to solve the problem. So the y-intercept is where we cross the y-axis. This would be the x-intercept. That's not what we want right now. We want the y-intercept, which is 4. So this is the correct answer. And actually, if you found this one first, because of the choices that are here, the only line that has a y-intercept of 4 is this one. So you actually, if you started with the y-intercept in your investigations here, you actually could get the answer even quicker. Number 2 is a vertical line. When it's a vertical line, you cannot write it in slope-intercept form. It's going to be in the form x equals a number. So the number I selected was negative 1 because the vertical line goes through negative 1 on the x-axis. If I asked you the slope of this, it would be undefined, by the way. Now we're writing equations when you're given a point and the slope. So we plug the slope in for m. Then we use the point as a sample, xy. So I'm going to replace y with 5 and x with negative 1. The most common mistake here is to swap the negative 1 and 5 by accident. And then the only variable you have left is b, so you can go ahead and solve for that. When you multiply, watch those signs. And then when you move the 3 over, you're going to get 2 as your answer. Don't forget the x in there, and don't forget the plus in between. For number 4, your slope is 1/3, so you're going to plug that in for m, and you're going to use these as your x and y. Don't panic when you see the fraction. This one actually works out real nice, because when you do 1/3 times negative 3, that just becomes negative 1, because this right here, you can either reduce early, so you can cross those out and make it negative 1 over 1, which gives you negative 1, or if you want, you can multiply top times top, and bottom times bottom, and then reduce. You're going to get negative 1 no matter what you do there. So this is negative 1. And when we add 1 to both sides, we get that b equals 5. And again, don't forget the x here. Don't forget the plus. And again, guys, you can fast forward through any of this you want. So if you don't have questions on these, just move ahead to where you have questions. For number 5, here we were given 2 points. So what we need to do is find the slope. I use the slope formula, which is what I think you guys will want to do as well. I mean, I guess technically you could graph it and try to find the slope from that, but I think that I don't have graph paper handy. I may not be able to count the rise over run so precisely. So I'm going to go ahead and label x1, y1, and x2, y2. Remember, your order pairs have to go x, y. This could have been x2, y2, and this could be x1, y1, but they have to go x, y, x, y. So I plugged in here 5 minus 2, the y's up top, and then 0 minus negative 2. Be careful with those signs. So that's how I ended up with a positive there, because I have a minus and negative. So that's my slope. And now I'm at y equals 3/2 x plus b. I need to find b. Well, if you look carefully, this right here is the y-intercept. I know that's the y-intercept because the x-coordinate is 0. If you go to plot 0, 5 on a graph, it's on the y-axis. So that means that you can use 5 as b and you're all set. You don't have to do any other work. Now, in the event that you didn't notice that, no big deal. what you can do here is you can use either of the points. And let's say you use 0, 5 as your xy. Well, what'll happen is you'll plug in 5 for y. You'll use 0 for x. Anything times 0 is 0. And you get 5 equals b. Now, if you were thrown off by the 0, because sometimes students see 0 and they kind of get uncomfortable with it, just to give you another or here, another way to do it, you actually could use instead, you could use negative 2, 2. So if you use negative 2, 2, here's what that looks like. You'll use 2 for y, and you'll use negative 2 for x. This reduces, and you end up getting negative 3, because a positive times a negative is a negative. Oops, I forgot to put b here. I'm not supposed to know that that's 5 yet. Sorry about that. So you have b here. You'll plug in x and y. This becomes negative 3. And then when you add 3 to both sides, you get 5 just as we had shown before. So it's a nice shortcut if you recognize that you have the y-intercept. But if you miss it, no big deal. You can still do the work either way. This is kind of getting smushed together here. Let me separate these. That's something you can always do on your own papers too, guys. If you're ever doing your work and you feel like everything's getting smushed together, you can make boxes for yourself. For number 6, again, we're going to use the slope formula. I picked x1, y1, x2, y2. Your slope is y2 minus y1. Make sure you put the y's on top, x's on the bottom. x2 minus x1. And I got negative 1 minus 1 and 2 minus 5. And watch those signs. The numerator is negative 2. The denominator is negative 3. A negative over negative reduces to a positive. So we can pop m in here. And then we can use either point. I'm going to guess that you guys are going to use 5, 1 because they're both positive. So that's what I used. So I replaced y with 1 and x with 5. If I put 5 over 1 and I do top times top, bottom times bottom, I get 10 over 3. Now this one's not as nice as last time because last time, like over here, the fraction reduced. And up in number 4, the fraction reduced out. Here we're kind of stuck with the fraction. So a technique we can use is what we learned in the previous chapter, where we multiply both sides by the LCD. So the only denominator here is 3. So if I multiply both sides by 3, this gives me 3. When I distribute over here, 10 thirds times 3 is going to reduce to 10. No more fraction. And then I have 3b. When I move the 10 over by subtracting, I end up with negative 7 equals 3b. And when I divide both sides by 3, I get negative 7 thirds. So remember, when we have a negative b value, we put in a minus. You can also write plus negative, but it's not very common to see that. We would give you full credit here if you did that, but usually we write it like this instead. So continuing on. For number 7, we want to know what's parallel to this line. So to be parallel, we want to focus on the slope. Parallel lines have the same slope. So if we're looking for parallel, that line has to have the same slope. So the only one here that has the same slope is A. For number 8, perpendicular was abbreviated, but we want the slope that's perpendicular. It's all about slope when you're doing parallel and perpendicular. So if your slope is negative 4 thirds, the slope of a perpendicular line is going to be what we call the opposite reciprocal. Opposite means change the sign. So instead of negative, I make it positive. Reciprocal means flip the fraction. So instead of 4 thirds, I make it 3/4. So the slope we're looking for is 3/4, and the only one that has a slope of 3/4 is A. They did throw some answers in here to try to trick you. See how they put a 3/4 here? But that's not the slope. That would be the y-intercept of this line. They also put a 3/4 here, but be careful, that's negative. We need to have the opposite. So if this slope is negative, then the slope of a line that's perpendicular has to be positive. Okay. Number 9 is next. Number 9. So I have the slope. We want to be parallel, so we keep it exactly the same. And then we're going to use the point that's given. So that's my x, that's my y. Here, negative times a negative makes a positive, and 5 over 5 reduces. So that's how this just becomes 2. If that's a little confusing for you, another way to do this part is you have negative 2 over 5 times negative 5. So you can put that over 1, and top times top is 10, and bottom times bottom is 5. So if you multiply the numerators, you get 10. If you multiply the denominators, you get 5. And 10 over 5 reduces to 2. So if you don't like reducing early, that's what that's called when we cross them out. You can always do top times top, bottom times bottom, and then reduce. When you move the 2 over, you're going to get -5. A very common mistake on this one would be to have a 1 or a -1 for your slope, y-intercept by accident. Another thing to look out for is when you're doing these parallel and perpendicular problems, make sure that you put b, because b is unknown. We need to find b in that step. A lot of times people put the number here by accident, or they grab one of these numbers. You want to make sure that you put b, the variable, so you can know that you have to find it. Okay. This one, we want to go through this point and be perpendicular to this line. Well, here's the slope of the line. It's -1/2. If we want to be perpendicular, we want to flip that and change the sign. So instead of negative, we'll be positive. And when we flip, we get 2 over 1. So our slope that we want to use is 2. What's very important in the next step is that you put b here. Because once you find m, your next job is to find b. So you have m, but you need to find out what b is. Don't just grab this number. Don't just grab those numbers. Unless we know the new y-intercept, but we don't know the new y-intercept. And then we use our sample xy. So plug in for x, plug in for y, and watch those signs at the end. When you move the 2 over, you get -7 for b. And we're almost finished. Number 11, I get x equals 3. This is a vertical line. When you have a vertical line, it's x equals a number. This one here, number 12, is a horizontal line. When you have a horizontal line, you have y equals a number. Those are 2 special cases. If you're making a reference sheet to help you during the quiz, I would write these down, because then you won't have to look through your notes for it. So for the vertical line, it's x equals whatever this number is. For the horizontal line, it's y equals whatever this number is. But another way to remember, if it helps you, is to think about the points on the line. The points on this line are 3, 1, 3, 4, 3, -2. I'm just kind of picking some, right? 3, -4. And if you look at all these points, they all have something in common. They all have 3 in the location where the x is. So that's why the equation is x equals 3. The equation is just a rule. It tells you about all the points on the line. Every single point on this line has x equals 3. Over here, if you look at the points, every single point on this line has the y is 2. -2, sorry. Said that wrong. So here's just a few that I just picked. 4, -2, 0, -2, and 3, -2. They all have -2 in the y position. So that's the rule for the line. And that's all an equation is. It's a rule. And then the very last 2, we're just testing if you are reading what the question actually says. Because a lot of people will go ahead and just write the full equation for this one. I only asked you for the slope. So to find the slope, I use this point and this point. Down 1, right 3. And down 1 is going to get the negative, right 3 gets a positive, and that's how I got -1/3. You can have the negative up top. You can have the negative out front, or you can have the negative on the bottom, but make sure you don't put negative top and bottom, because that would make a positive. And you know that I always like to draw a little car on here. Since the car is going downhill, that better be a negative slope. And then finally, I want the coordinates of the y-intercept. So again, testing that you're reading the instructions, because sometimes people will give the slope here, give the full equation of the line. So -4 is where we cross the y-axis. Coordinates means give it as an ordered pair. Give the x and the y. Common mistake on this would be to give 3 as the answer. Another common mistake would be to switch the positions here. -4, 0 would not be correct. -4, 0 would be this point out here. That's not even on the line. So make sure that you have the 0 first and then the -4 for that y-intercept. I hope that video was helpful, and I'll see you guys in class.